Standard procedure for an unnatural event. They teach you in the academy that the official report is the final word on any incident, an objective record of fact. This is the most important lie we tell. The real reports, the ones that explain why a house can have 5 corners or how a man can cast 2 shadows, are never written down and are filed only in memory. The Departmental Standard Operating Procedure Manual was a brick. At 612 pages, its sheer physical density was its primary feature. Officer Miller had hefted his copy from the Academy supply clerk, its crisp spine cracking with a sound of finality. It was a book of answers, a flowchart for chaos, covering everything from traffic stops to hostage negotiations with the same dispassionate, numbered certainty. It lived in the bottom of his locker, a silent testament to the belief that every human variable could be accounted for, managed, and filed away in triplicate. He believed it, too. Had built his career on that certainty. Procedure was the wall that stood between a civil society and the frantic, messy business of human nature. You learned the codes, you followed the steps, you trusted the process. The process kept you and everyone else safe. That belief held firm until the day Sergeant Chen pulled him aside after a shift that had been, by all accounts, perfectly ordinary. They sat in the empty briefing room, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Chen, his field training officer, was a man carved from granite and patience. He didn't waste words, and he never engaged in station house chatter, which made his request to talk all the more unsettling. He placed his own SOP manual on the table between them. It was identical to Miller's, but its corners were soft and frayed, its cover worn smooth from years of use. "You know this book, Miller?" Chen began, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question. "You know the section on barricaded subjects. You know the protocols for a hazardous materials spill. You know what to do when you're the first officer on the scene of a homicide." Miller nodded, his posture straight, his hands resting on his knees. "Yes, Sergeant." Chen tapped the thick cover with a single, blunt finger. "This book is a masterpiece of law enforcement. It accounts for malice, for desperation, for greed, for psychosis. It gives us a framework to operate within the known bounds of human behavior." He paused, his gaze locking onto Miller's. "Its only flaw is that it presumes those are the only bounds that exist." A cold stillness settled in the room. Miller waited, his mind cycling through possibilities. Was this a test? A psychological evaluation? Some bizarre, informal review? Every so often, Chen continued, his voice dropping even lower, as if the walls themselves might be listening, we get a call out that doesn't fit the framework. A call where the laws of physics seem to be optional. A situation where the witness statement is factually impossible, but also demonstrably true. He leaned forward slightly, the worn vinyl of his chair groaning in protest. When that happens, this book is useless. Worse than useless. Following standard procedure in a non-standard reality can get you and your partner killed, or worse. It can get you erased. Miller's academy training screamed at him to find a rational explanation. He thought of hallucinogens, of elaborate hoaxes, of mass hysteria. Chen saw the skepticism in his eyes and offered a thin, tired smile. "I'm not talking about meth-induced paranoia or pranksters, Miller. I'm talking about a domestic disturbance call where the house has one more room than its floor plan allows. A missing person case where the subject is found inside a closet that's been locked from the outside for 20 years. A traffic accident with no point of impact." He let the statements hang in the air, each one an assault on the orderly world Miller had sworn to protect. This wasn't procedure, it was folklore, ghost stories told in the dead of night. But the look on Chen's face held no hint of a joke. It held the profound weariness of a man who had seen too many things he could never write down in an official report. "There is no book for these events," Chen said, finally. "There's no addendum you can be issued. There is only a set of unwritten rules, passed from one officer to the next. Protocols for managing the unnatural. And learning them is not optional. Not anymore. Your name came up. You've been selected." The world outside the briefing room window, the familiar sight of patrol cars cruising past, the distant wail of a siren, suddenly seemed fragile, a thin veneer over something else entirely. The conflict in Miller's mind was a silent, violent storm. Every instinct, every ounce of his training, warred against the impossible reality Chen was laying before him. The climax of his understanding arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet, terrifying acceptance. The wall of procedure had a door in it, and Sergeant Chen was holding it open. 2 days after the conversation in the briefing room, nothing had changed. The shifts were a familiar rhythm of minor traffic violations, noise complaints, and the occasional shoplifter. The world had not cracked open. Chen had not mentioned their talk again, his demeanor as unreadable as ever. Miller found himself in a state of hypervigilance, scrutinizing every call, every witness, for a hint of the impossible. He found only the mundane, and the silence from Chen was beginning to make him feel like he'd imagined the entire exchange. They were parked near a public library, finishing the last of their lukewarm coffee, when the radio crackled to life. 7 Lima 3, 7 Lima 3, respond to a wellness check. 1942 East Sycamore Lane. Reporting party is a neighbor, states she hasn't seen the resident in over 24 hours. Mail is piling up. Resident is an Arthur Graves, male, 72 years of age. Chen keyed the mic without looking up from his paperwork. 7 Lima 3, received. En route to 1942 East Sycamore. He put the patrol car in drive, and they pulled out into the afternoon traffic. Sycamore Lane was in a quiet, older part of the city, a neighborhood of modest, single-story homes with meticulously cared-for lawns. It was the kind of street where a wellness check usually ended in one of two ways: either the resident was at the hospital visiting a relative, or they had passed away peacefully in their sleep. Both outcomes were routine. Both had a corresponding section in the SOP manual. Miller scanned the houses as they passed. A sprinkler ticked back and forth across a patch of unnaturally green grass. A tricycle lay abandoned on a driveway. He felt a knot of anticipation in his gut, an unwelcome alertness he tried to suppress. It's just a wellness check, he told himself. RP is Martha Esposito at 1938, Chen said, his eyes on the road. Let's talk to her first. Get the baseline. The word baseline hung in the air. It was standard terminology, but coming from Chen, it now felt weighted with a second meaning. Miller just nodded. The house belonging to Arthur Graves was unremarkable. It was a small beige home with brown trim, a tidy rock garden in the front, and a single, decade-old sedan in the driveway. A few letters and a rolled-up newspaper were visible in the mailbox. Everything appeared perfectly normal, perfectly still. Martha Esposito met them on her porch, twisting a dish towel in her hands. She was a small, anxious woman who explained that Mr. Graves was a man of routine. He retrieved his paper at 6:30 every morning, and the fact that yesterday's and today's were still there was what worried her. She hadn't heard his television, hadn't seen his lights on. He's a good man, a quiet man, she fretted. I just hope he hasn't, fallen. Well, check on him, ma'am, Miller assured her, using the calm, practiced tone from his training. Have you noticed anything unusual? Any strange noises or visitors? The woman shook her head. No, nothing at all. It's been as quiet as a tomb over there. They thanked her and walked over to the Graves residence. The procedure was simple. Announce their presence, check the doors and windows for an unsecured point of entry, and if none was found, make a forced entry for the preservation of life. It was a sequence Miller had performed a dozen times. Chen walked the perimeter of the house, his movements economical and precise, while Miller went to the front door. He knocked, the sound echoing flatly. Mr. Graves? This is the police department, we're here to do a wellness check. Are you okay in there? Silence was the only reply. He knocked again, louder this time. Arthur Graves? Police. He placed his ear against the cool wood of the door. He heard nothing. No television, no movement, no labored breathing. Just a profound and absolute quiet. He looked at the windows. The curtains were drawn. He tried the doorknob. It was locked. Chen completed his circuit of the house and joined him on the porch. All windows are secured. Back door is a deadbolt. no signs of forced entry. The situation was straightforward. They had established cause to believe the resident might be in distress. The next step was to breach the door. Miller expected Chen to call for the fire department to bring a ram, or to authorize him to use the pry bar from the trunk. Instead, Chen just stood there for a moment, looking not at the door, but at the roofline of the house, his expression unreadable. "All right, Miller," he said, his voice even. "Let's go in." He reached past Miller and tried the doorknob himself. It turned with a quiet click. It hadn't been locked at all. The small click of the latch echoed loudly in the quiet street. Miller felt a prickle of unease. He was certain he had felt the resistance of a deadbolt just moments before. He glanced at Chen, whose face remained a mask of professional indifference. Chen pushed the door inward, his other hand resting near his sidearm. "Police department," Chen announced into the still air of the house. "Announcing our presence." They crossed the threshold into a small, tidy living room. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light cutting through the drawn blinds, but no dust rested on the surfaces of the polished end tables or the dark wood of a grandfather clock that stood silent against one wall. The house was immaculate, preserved under a layer of profound quiet. It felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit curated to look like one. They cleared the house with practiced efficiency. Miller took the lead, his weapon at a low ready, moving from room to room. Kitchen countertops wiped clean, not a single dish in the sink. Bedroom a simple twin bed, the quilt pulled taut and wrinkle-free. Bathroom a damp towel hung perfectly straight on the rack, the only sign of recent use. There was no sign of Arthur Graves, and no sign of a struggle, an accident, or any kind of disturbance. The silence was absolute. The man was simply gone. Only one door remained, at the end of a short hallway. It likely led to a den or a small study. Miller paused, signaling to Chen before pushing it open. The room was lined with bookshelves, filled with volumes on history and horticulture. A single, comfortable-looking armchair sat beside a standing lamp, and a large oak desk was positioned under the room's only window. Like the rest of the house, it was meticulously clean. And, like the rest of the house, it was empty. Miller took a step inside, his boots making no sound on the thick carpet. Something felt wrong. It was a subtle, instinctual alarm ringing in the back of his mind. He scanned the room again. Bookshelves, chair, desk, window. It all seemed normal. He took another step toward the desk, intending to check for any notes or clues to Mr. Gravis' whereabouts. He glanced back at Chen, who remained framed in the doorway, watching him. That was when the disconnect hit him. The doorway seemed farther away than it should have been. He stopped, turning his full attention to the geometry of the space. The exterior dimensions of this wing of the house, which he had just observed from the outside, couldn't be more than 15 feet deep. It shared a wall with the attached garage. He had already taken at least 10 paces from the doorway and was not yet halfway to the desk under the far window. The ceiling seemed higher, the walls wider. The volume of air in the room was simply, factually, wrong. A wave of vertigo washed over him. He felt like a man standing on a train platform, trying to judge the speed of a silent express train blurring past. His eyes traced the corner where the wall met the ceiling, trying to force it to conform to the rules of perspective, but it refused. The room was a physical impossibility, a contradiction made of drywall and plaster. Sergeant Miller began, his voice sounding small and distant to his own ears. "Are you seeing this?" He turned to look at Chen. The sergeant hand T moved from the threshold. His expression was unchanged, his posture relaxed. He showed no surprise, no confusion, no alarm. He simply looked at the impossible room, and then at Miller standing within it, with the calm, observational detachment of an officer arriving at a scene he had been briefed on countless times before. His silence was the most terrifying confirmation of all. Chen's gaze shifted from the impossible space to Miller's face, his expression holding a flicker of something clinical, an assessment. "Breathe, Miller," he said, his voice level. "Your senses are giving you conflicting data. Your brain is trying to resolve a paradox. It's a normal physiological response. The statement was so detached, so academic, it shocked Miller out of his stupor more effectively than a shout ever could have. A normal response? Nothing about this was normal. He took a steadying breath, the air in the room feeling strangely thin and cold. "What is this place?" Miller asked, his voice tight. Instead of answering, Chen reached to his duty belt. His hand bypassed his firearm, his taser, his radio. With a deliberate motion, he unclipped a heavy, well-worn, 25-foot contractor's tape measure. The bright yellow case was scuffed and marked with paint, a tool of tangible, physical reality. He stepped across the threshold, his presence seeming to anchor the space around him. "First protocol," Chen said, his voice the calm, instructional tone of a field training officer teaching a rookie how to write a parking ticket. In a location where spatial integrity is compromised, your perception is the first casualty. Your eyes will lie to you. Your sense of balance will lie. Your instincts, Miller, will get you killed. The only thing you can trust is the initial, verifiable, physical measurement." He held out the tape measure. "Hold this." Miller took the metal end tab, his fingers numb. Chen walked back to the exterior wall next to the doorframe. "Place it on the corner, right there." Miller did as he was told, pressing the tab into the scene where the hallway wall met the study's entrance. Chen walked the length of the exterior wall, the metal tape unspooling with a sharp, metallic rasp. He stopped at the far corner, near the edge of the attached garage he knew was on the other side. "Read it out," Chen commanded. Miller looked down. The black and red markings were clear and absolute. 14 feet, 6 inches. "Correct," Chen said, letting the tape retract with a loud snap. "Now." He turned and faced the impossible depth of the study. "We measure the interior." He hooked the tab onto the same interior corner and began to walk toward the far wall, toward the desk and the window. He walked, and the yellow ribbon of the tape measure kept unspooling. 10 feet. 15. 20. Miller watched, mesmerized, as the sergeant continued to move away from him, crossing a distance that should not exist. Chen finally reached the far wall and pressed the case against the plaster. The tape between them was pulled taut, a straight, unwavering line of empirical fact cutting through a room that defied logic. "Now what's it say, Miller?" Chen's voice came from a distance that felt like 50 feet away. Miller's eyes dropped to the tape at his end. He had to squint to read the number. 52 feet, 2 inches. The discrepancy was a chasm. 37.5 feet of room that simply could not, exist within the physical structure of the house. Chen walked back, the tape retracting into its case. He pulled his standard-issue notepad and pen from his shirt pocket and, with the methodical calm of an insurance adjuster documenting storm damage, he wrote down the numbers. Exterior wall 14.6. Interior wall 52.2. Discrepancy 37.8. He underlined the final number twice. It was an act of such profound, bureaucratic normalcy that it was more disorienting than the room itself. He was reducing a tear in the fabric of reality to a line item. "This," Chen said, tapping the notepad, "is now the only fact about this room that we can be sure of. Everything else is conjecture. This is our anchor. This is ground truth. Remember that, Miller. Always trust the tape." Chen closed his notepad with a soft snap and slid it back into his shirt pocket. He stood in the impossible room for a moment longer, his gaze sweeping over the bookshelves and the silent desk, then turned and walked out without a word. Miller followed him, stepping back across the threshold into the hallway felt like surfacing from deep water. The air seemed to thicken, and the dimensions of the house settled back into a comforting, logical state. He pulled the front door closed behind them, the latch clicking with mundane finality. "Standard canvas," Chen stated, his eyes already scanning the neighboring houses. "We spoke with Esposito at 1938. Let's try the other side. 1946. It was the correct procedural next step. In any other missing person or wellness check case, they would be establishing a timeline, seeking corroborating statements. But Miller understood that Chen wasn't just gathering information, he was assessing the perimeter, gauging the bleed. The house at 1946 Sycamore was the mirror image of Gravis' home, but with a riot of colorful flowers blooming in the front garden. A woman in her late 60s with kind eyes and flower on her apron answered the door. Her name was Eleanor Gable. "Oh, heavens, is something wrong with Arthur?" she asked, her expression immediately clouding with concern before they even introduced themselves fully. "We're just checking on him, ma'am," Miller said. His neighbor was concerned she hadn't seen him. "Can you tell us the last time you saw or spoke with Mr. Graves?" Mrs. Gable's brow furrowed in thought. "Well, I saw him just this morning, of course. Around 7, I think. He was out weeding his rock garden, same as always." She offered a confident smile. "He's probably just run out to the grocery. He does that sometimes." The statement was so clear, so certain, that Miller felt a momentary sense of relief. Maybe they had missed him. Maybe the room was just a trick of the light, a momentary disorientation. Chen, however, remained impassive. He made a small note in his pad. "And you're sure about that, ma'am? This morning?" "Positive," she chirped. "I waved to him from my kitchen window." "Thank you," Chen said, his voice even. "We also heard he was planning a trip. A cruise, I believe. Do you know anything about that?" A shadow of confusion passed over Mrs. Gable's face. "Oh, yes. His big trip to Alaska. He was so excited. He left last Tuesday. Said he'd be gone for at least a week, maybe longer." She delivered the second statement with the exact same untroubled certainty as the first. The two pieces of information, "I saw him this morning and he left on a trip a week ago," existed in her mind as equal incompatible truths. Miller waited for her to correct herself, to laugh and say she'd gotten her days mixed up. She did not. He watched her face as the cognitive dissonance began to set in. Her smile faltered. She blinked slowly, as if rebooting. He left last week," she repeated, her voice a little weaker now. "But I saw him weeding. This morning." Her hand went to her temple, rubbing it in a small circle. The distress was not that of someone who was merely confused, it was a deeper, more fundamental bewilderment, like a mathematician staring at an equation where 2 + 2 equaled both 4 and 7 simultaneously. That doesn't make sense, does it?" she stammered, looking from Miller's face to Chen's, seeking an explanation they could not provide. "How can he be gone if I saw him? I'm not forgetting things, officer. I remember waving. He had his little sun hat on." Her gaze became unfocused. The two contradictory memories were now at war, and the battle was taking a visible toll. The color drained from her cheeks. Chen took a half-step forward, his tone shifting from investigative to something softer, more placating. "It's been a long day, Mrs. Gable. We appreciate your time. You've been very helpful," he said, gently closing his notepad. It was a clear signal. The interview was over. "But which one is true?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Well, figure it out, ma'am," Chen said. "Don't you worry about it." They walked back toward the patrol car, leaving the woman standing in her doorway, staring at the empty house next door, her mind wrestling with an impossible knot. The duty to protect and serve, Miller realized, sometimes meant protecting people from the truth of their own perceptions. As they walked back to the patrol car, the placid suburban street seemed to hum with a discordant energy. Miller could feel the effects of the Gable interview like a low-grade fever. It wasn't just that her memory was faulty, it was broken in a way that defied simple explanation. A mind holding two mutually exclusive truths as fact was a system error, a glitch in the human operating system. "What was that?" Miller asked, his voice low as he slid into the passenger seat. "Amnesia? Some kind of fugue state?" "Contamination," Chen replied, his tone flat as he started the engine, letting it idle. "The anomaly is localized in the house, but its perceptual effects are leaking. Mrs. Gable's memory is trying to reconcile a week of Mr. Graves being gone with a residual imprint of him from this morning. The brain can't hold both, so it starts to fray." He unbuckled his seatbelt and got out of the car, walking around to the trunk. Miller watched him in the side view mirror. Instead of the standard crime scene kit, Chen used a small, unique key to open a reinforced metal lockbox bolted to the floor of the trunk. From it, he withdrew an object that looked like a relic from another era, a bulky, black and gray Polaroid SX70 camera. It was the kind of instant camera Miller had only ever seen in old movies. "You're kidding me," Miller said as Chen got back into the car and placed the camera on the center console. "Forensics is going to laugh us out of the building. My phone has a 48-megapixel sensor." "Your phone is a liability," Chen stated without looking at him. "Second protocol analog records only. No digital photography, no video, no audio recording. Ever." He held up the camera. "A digital file is data. It's a sequence of ones and zeros that a processor interprets as an image. An environment like the one in that study can manipulate that data as it's being written. It can add things, remove things, or leave you with a corrupted file that's completely useless. It's like trying to take a picture of a magnet with a floppy disk." He paused, letting the concept settle. "This," he said, tapping the Polaroid, "is not data. This is a chemical reaction. Light hits a sheet of film coated in silver halide crystals and reagent pods, creating a direct physical imprint. It's a closed system, a tangible event. It's much harder to falsify a chemical change than it is to alter a string of code." The logic was sound, in a terrifying, sideways kind of way. It presupposed a threat that operated on a level of fundamental information, a force that could edit reality at the source code. There entered the Graves residence, the silence of the home pressing in on them again. They moved back down the short hallway to the study. Standing at the threshold, Miller felt the same subtle lurch of vertigo as the room's impossible dimensions reasserted themselves. Chen handed the camera to Miller. 3 shots. One from the doorway, straight on. One angled toward the left corner. One of the desk and window. Miller raised the antiquated device. It felt clumsy and heavy in his hands. He looked through the viewfinder, framed the far wall, and pressed the shutter button. The camera whirred, a mechanical groan that sounded alien in the quiet house, and ejected a square photograph with a white border. A blank, pale green chemical slick covered its surface. He placed it on the hallway floor and took the other 2 shots, the camera spitting out 2 more blank squares. They knelt in the normal space of the hallway, watching the images slowly resolve as if developing in a darkroom. The pale green gave way to murky browns and grays, which sharpened into the recognizable shades of the room. At first, they looked like unremarkable, slightly washed-out photographs of a study. The bookshelves, the armchair, the distant desk, it was all there. But as the last of the chemical haze cleared, something else became visible. Floating in the air of the photographed room were faint, ethereal patterns. They were not reflections or lens flares. They were intricate, geometric lattices, like shimmering webs of light, composed of interlocking hexagonal shapes and lines that met at impossible, non-euclidean angles. They were overlaid on the room, a blueprint of an unseen architecture hanging invisibly in the space. To the naked eye, the room was empty air. To the camera's chemical process, it was filled with this complex, crystalline structure. Miller picked one up, his fingers trembling slightly. He could see the grain of the wood on the desk through the glowing lines of the pattern. It was a layer of information his own senses were completely blind to. Chen took the photos from him, handling them with the detached care of an archivist. He slipped each one into a separate, numbered evidence baggie. "Now we have something for the file," Chen said, his voice betraying no emotion at the sight of the impossible made manifest on a small square of paper. Chen slid the last bagged photograph into a pouch on his belt. The procedure had been executed with a sterile precision that felt entirely at odds with the impossible nature of what they had just documented. For a moment, a fragile sense of control returned. They had measured the paradox, photographed its ghost. They had contained it within the dry language of an investigation. That illusion was shattered by the sound of the radio on Chen's shoulder. It wasn't the calm, measured cadence of the dispatcher, it was a burst of static, followed by a voice that was strained, tight with confusion. "All units in Sector 7, be advised, We are receiving multiple anomalous reports originating from the 1900 block of East Sycamore Lane. Stand by. Chen's posture changed instantly. The detached investigator vanished, replaced by a man bracing for impact. He held a hand up to Miller, a silent command to stay put and listen. The dispatcher's voice returned, the professional veneer cracking. 7 Lima 3, are you still on Sycamore? We have a caller at 1934. States he opened his front door and is looking into the kitchen of 1930. Both homeowners are on the line, confirming a shared threshold. She hesitated over the word, as if it were a foreign object in her mouth. Miller's blood ran cold. That was Martha Esposito's next-door neighbor. The effect was no longer confined to the Graves house. It was metastasizing. Before Chen could key his mic to respond, another call broke through. Dispatch, 7 Robert 1, we're a block out. What's the nature of? The dispatcher cut him off, her voice rising in pitch. Break, 7 Robert. New call. 1950 Sycamore. Female caller states the hallway to her back bedroom as she says it keeps getting longer. She's been walking for 2 minutes and can't reach the door. Miller looked from the radio to the study door at the end of the hall. He imagined the woman, trapped in a domestic version of the same spatial distortion, her home warping around her. The silent, contained oddity of the study had become an active, spreading contagion. Do not respond, 7 Robert, Chen's voice boomed, overriding the channel. He had grabbed the handset, his knuckles white. All units, establish a 1-block perimeter around Sycamore Lane between Oak and Elm. Allow no civilian traffic in or out. Acknowledge. A confused series of acknowledgments trickled back. The dispatcher came on again, her voice now a thin thread of controlled panic. 7 Lima 3, we have another. The Gable residence at 1946. The caller is hysterical. Says the street out her front window is upside down. Chen didn't answer her. He was already moving toward the front door, his strides long and purposeful. He looked at Miller, and for the first time, Miller saw not wary experience, but grim urgency in his eyes. The quiet observation phase was over. The resonance is unstable, Chen said, his voice a low, clipped report. The initial event in this house is acting as an epicenter, and the distortion is propagating outward. We failed to establish containment in time. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. What started as a wellness check is now a level 3 architectural bleed. The SOP manual has no section for that. The statement was a final confirmation they were far beyond the map now, navigating by a set of rules Miller had yet to learn, and the ground was shifting beneath their feet with every passing second. The cacophony on the main radio channel intensified, a rising tide of panicked voices and confused reports from officers arriving at the newly established perimeter. They were describing streets that didn't connect properly and housed numbers that were shifting out of sequence. To them, it was chaos. To Chen, it seemed to be a predictable, if escalating, pattern. He ignored the barrage of questions from dispatch. Instead, he reached into the patrol car and retrieved a second, smaller radio from a locked compartment beneath the dashboard. It was a compact, featureless black device, bearing no departmental markings. It looked more like military hardware than police equipment. Chen turned his back to the street, creating a shield of privacy with his body, and keyed the device. The sound it made was not the familiar squelch of the police band, but a short burst of digital hash. Sigma Actual, this is Watcher 7, Chen's voice was different now. Stripped of his FTO persona, it was the voice of a man making a field report to a superior. There was no uncertainty, only the recitation of facts. I have a confirmed level 3 architectural bleed. Epicenter is 1942 East Sycamore Lane. Perimeter is unstable and expanding. I am formally requesting a containment team, full deployment. There was a pause, filled only by the whisper of static from the secure channel. The response, when it came, was equally clipped, a voice so devoid of inflection it could have been synthesized. Watcher 7, Sigma Actual copies. Level 3 bleed at Sycamore. Containment team is spun up. ETA 15 minutes. Maintain the cordon. Do not engage the epicenter. Acknowledge. Watcher 7 acknowledges, Chen replied. He clipped the secure radio back to his belt, the entire exchange having taken less than 30 seconds. He turned back to Miller, his expression once again settling into a stony mask of professionalism. The pieces clicked into place for Miller with the force of a physical blow. The unwritten rules, the specialized equipment, the calm acceptance of the impossible, the coded language. Chen wasn't just an FTO who had seen a few strange things. He was a gatekeeper, a member of a unit that operated in the scenes of the department, a specialized response team for calls that couldn't be logged. Unit Sigma. Watcher 7. The terms were alien, but their meaning was terrifyingly clear. There was an entire infrastructure for this. You're one of them, Miller said, the statement flat. This whole time the FTO assignment was this a test? Was I being vetted? Part of it, Chen admitted, his attention focused on the end of the block, watching for the first of the perimeter units. We identify officers who demonstrate an aptitude for non-standard observation. Officers who don't immediately rationalize away what they're seeing. You flagged high. He spoke of it as if it were a score on a firing range qualification. The casual revelation of this hidden career track, the shadow department, was delivered with the same mundane tone as his instructions on filling out an evidence tag. So what now? Miller demanded, a current of anger and betrayal running beneath his shock. He had been a subject in an experiment he hadn't even known was being conducted. We just wait for the cavalry? We hold the line, Chen corrected him, his gaze sharp. Our primary duty is unchanged, Miller. Public safety. Right now, that means keeping unsuspecting civilians from walking into a street where gravity is a local variable, and it means keeping the responding officers from trying to apply standard procedure to a situation that will swallow them whole. We are the containment. Until Sigma arrives, we are all there is. The weight of that responsibility settled on Miller, eclipsing his personal sense of betrayal. Chen was right. Outside their small pocket of impossible truth, a dozen of their fellow officers were trying to make sense of a world that was actively breaking down. Their duty was to stand on that breaking edge and make sure no one else fell in. Sigma will handle the macro event, Chen said, his gaze sweeping the quiet street. Our job is to assess the point of origin. We need to know what we're dealing with before they get here. He turned and pushed the front door of the Graves residence open again. The mandate was clear, they were going back inside. Every tactical instinct Miller possessed screened against re-entering an unsecured, unstable location that was actively broadcasting a reality-warping field. But Chen's calm was a gravitational force, pulling procedure along in its wake. This was the job. They stepped back into the unnaturally still living room. The air had changed. It was colder now, and carried a faint, almost imperceptible hum, like the sound of a massive, distant transformer. The silence was no longer empty, it felt charged, expectant. They moved past the living room and toward the kitchen. As they approached, a soft, rhythmic sound reached them, the gentle clink of a ceramic mug being placed on a countertop, followed by the scrape of a spoon against its side. It was a familiar, domestic sound, and in the dead quiet of the house, it was utterly terrifying. Miller's hand went to his sidearm, his heart hammering against his ribs. Chen laid a hand on his arm, a silent order to hold. They reached the kitchen doorway and stopped. Standing at the counter, his back to them, was a man. He was elderly, with thin white hair, wearing a simple cardigan and slacks. He was translucent. Miller could see the precise grit of the tiled backsplash through the man's shimmering, indistinct form. It was Arthur Graves. The apparition moved with a slow, deliberate grace, completely unaware of their presence. He picked up a coffee pot, itself as ghostly and transparent as he was, and poured a stream of phantom liquid into the mug on the counter. The mug was already full. The liquid passed through the existing contents and the mug itself, splashing silently onto the countertop below. He then picked up the spectral spoon and stirred the non-existent coffee, the scraping sound repeating itself. He did this for a few seconds, then set the spoon down, picked up the pot, and poured again. It was a loop. A fragment of a memory, replaying itself endlessly. What in God's name is that? Miller whispered, his voice catching in his throat. Residual echo, Chen said, his voice a low murmur, never taking his eyes off the figure. It's not a ghost. It's not sentient. Think of it like a piece of film that's been exposed to the same image so many times, it's permanently burned in. He gestured toward the shimmering man. When a space-time distortion occurs, it can imprint powerful, repetitive moments onto the local environment. Mr. Graves probably started every morning for the last 30 years the exact same way, right here at this counter. When the event happened, it captured that routine, embedding it into the structure of the house itself. The clinical explanation did little to lessen the profound wrongness of the sight. The echo of Arthur Graves picked up the pot and poured the imaginary coffee for a fifth time, his movements smooth and seamless, a prisoner in a single moment of his own life. So where is he? Miller asked. The real him? The echo is the afterimage, Chen said, his expression grim. It's what's left behind when the object is removed. The real Arthur Graves is likely at the absolute center of the distortion. He's either the source of it, or its first victim. The translucent figure continued his task, a silent, ghostly recording of a life that was now hopelessly, impossibly tangled in the very fabric of his home. He stirred his coffee, poured, and stirred again, a man who wasn't either, trapped in a day that would never end. The front door of the house creaked open behind them. Both Miller and Chen spun around, weapons drawn, the sudden noise of violent intrusion into the charged silence. Framed in the doorway was a young officer, her face a mixture of confusion and apprehension. Miller recognized her as Deputy Rodriguez, a fresh-faced rookie barely 6 months out of the academy. She must have slipped through the disorganized cordon, looking for the primary unit on scene. Sarge? Miller? She called out, her voice hesitant. Dispatch went quiet. We've got things are a mess out here. I thought maybe her voice trailed off as her eyes adjusted to the dim interior, finally landing on the translucent figure of Arthur Graves in the kitchen. Her jaw went slack. The sight was so fundamentally wrong, so far outside any training scenario, that she froze completely. Miller saw the conflict in her eyes, the instinct to react, warring with a tonal inability to categorize what she was seeing. Rodriguez, Chen's voice was a low, urgent command. Stay by the door. Do not come further into the house. But it was too late. The deputy, driven by the academy-drilled imperative to engage and assess, took a step forward. Her police instincts, designed for a world of predictable human behavior, took over. She saw what appeared to be the missing person they'd been dispatched to find. Sir? Mr. Graves? She called out, her voice shaking but clear. This is the sheriff's department. Are you all right, sir? The residual echo of Arthur Graves continued its silent loop, pouring phantom coffee, completely oblivious. Frustrated by the lack of response, Rodriguez took another step into the house, her hand outstretched as if to touch his shoulder. Sir, can you hear me? Rodriguez, no. Chen roared. He moved with a speed Miller had never seen, covering the distance between them in 2 lone strides. He didn't grab her arm, he hooked his hand into the back of her body armor and physically hauled her backward, pulling her off balance and away from the kitchen. She stumbled, catching herself on the living room wall, her face a mask of shocked indignation. Sarge, what the hell? She demanded, trying to steady herself. Chen's face was grim, his eyes locked on her. Third protocol, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, directed as much at Miller as at the stunned deputy. Do not acknowledge. Do not interact. Do not attempt to communicate with the residual. Ever. He pointed a rigid finger toward the kitchen. That is not a person. It's an environmental recording. When you speak to it, when you try to engage with it, you are inserting yourself into the recording. You are linking your own perceptual baseline to the anomaly. He took a step closer to Rodriguez, his intensity pinning her in place. The echo is a hook. If it hooks you, the distortion attunes to you. The rules of this place start to apply to you, personally. Your memory starts to fray like the neighbors. You start seeing things that aren't there, even when you're miles away from here. In a worst-case scenario, he paused, letting the weight of the words sink in, you don't leave. The place incorporates you. You become another echo, trapped in your own loop for eternity. A profound, chilling silence descended on the room, broken only by the gentle, maddening clink of the phantom coffee mug from the kitchen. Rodriguez stared at Chen, then at the shimmering apparition, a dawning, horrified understanding spreading across her features. She hadn't just been speaking to a ghost, she had been standing on the edge of a psychic abyss, and Chen had yanked her back from the brink. The duty to protect, Miller grasped with sickening clarity, extended not just to the public, but to their own, who could fall victim to a new kind of line of duty death that no one would ever understand. Chen escorted a pale and trembling Deputy Rodriguez out of the house, instructing her in a low, firm voice to remain at the outer perimeter and assist with traffic control. Her brief, terrifying education was over. Chen and Miller remained on the porch of the Graves residence, a two-man island in a sea of escalating weirdness. Through the open door, the silent echo of Arthur Graves continued his coffee ritual, a metronome marking the unnatural time. Precisely 15 minutes after Chen's call, 2 vehicles turned onto Sycamore Lane. They were not patrol cars or SWAT vans. They were plain, dark blue utility vans with no markings, their windows tinted to an opaque black. They moved with a silent, deliberate speed, ignoring the haphazardly parked police cruisers, and came to a stop directly in front of the house. The doors slid open, and the occupants disembarked. Miller had expected men in tactical gear, bristling with weapons. The reality was something else entirely. 4 individuals emerged, 2 men and 2 women, all dressed in simple charcoal gray coveralls, like telephone repair technicians or scientific researchers. They wore no body armor, and the only visible equipment on their belts were small, complex-looking electronic meters. They moved with a quiet, focused efficiency, their faces impassive and professional. This was Unit Sigma. One of the men, who appeared to be the team lead, approached Chen and handed him a small, heavy case. They exchanged no words, only a brief, understanding nod. The team lead then turned to his people and began issuing quiet, technical commands that Miller could only partially overhear. Establish a primary baseline at the threshold, watch for temporal shear near the western wall, deploy dampeners in a triangular array. The team moved with practiced synergy. One woman opened the rear of a van and began unloading strange, tripod-mounted devices. They looked like a cross between a surveyor's theodolite and a studio microphone, with brass fittings and tightly wound copper coils. She placed one at the edge of the lawn, a second near the driveway, and a third on the neighbor's property line. As she activated each one, they began to emit a low, subsonic hum that Miller felt more in his bones than heard with his ears. It was a steady, grounding vibration that seemed to push back against the discordant rawness of the area. Another technician, a young man with intense, focused eyes, knelt on the sidewalk. He opened a small, padded case and removed several thick sticks of what looked like chalk. It was a deep, rust-red color, and as he began to draw on the concrete, Miller saw that it left a line shimmering with fine metallic particles. He didn't draw a simple circle, it was a breathtakingly complex geometric symbol, a pattern of interlocking circles, triangles, and intricate, flowing script that looked like a fusion of circuit diagrams and ancient calligraphy. He drew with the speed and confidence of an artist who had rendered the same design 1,000 times. "What are they doing?" Miller asked, his voice a near whisper. "Establishing a stable reality field," Chen replied, his attention fixed on the team's work. "The hum from those devices, we call them harmonic dampeners, it's designed to resonate at the frequency of baseline physical law. It reinforces normal spacetime, creating a buffer zone against the anomaly." He gestured to the technician drawing on the pavement. "The chalk is infused with ferrous oxide and silver nitrate. It helps to define the perimeter of the buffer zone, a boundary the distortion has difficulty crossing. Think of it as drawing a new, more reliable set of rules onto the ground." Their methods were a bizarre fusion of advanced physics and something that bordered on ritual. They were not fighting the anomaly with force, they were containing it, isolating it, and posing order on a place where order had broken down. They were technicians of reality itself, and their calm, methodical work was more profoundly impressive than any tactical assault could ever be. Within minutes, the chaotic energy that had been spilling out across the neighborhood seemed to recede, pulling back from the humming tripods and the intricate chalk lines, contained for now by the quiet efforts of the gray-clad teen. With the perimeter secured by the humming dampeners and chalk sigils, the atmosphere on Sycamore Lane stabilized. The reports of shifting geography over the main radio channel ceased, replaced by the confused silence of the patrol officers holding the cordon. The Sigma team lead, a shark-featured woman with gray streaks in her hair, approached Chen and Miller. Her name tag read Dr. Eris. She held a tablet displaying a complex, fluctuating waveform. "The bleed has been contained to the primary structure," she stated, her voice crisp and devoid of preamble. "Resonance has dropped by 70%. Your initial assessment was correct, Watcher 7. It's a classic spatial recursion, likely triggered by a focal object." She looked at Miller, her gaze analytical, as if she were evaluating a new piece of equipment. "You're the primary contact? Officer Miller?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied, feeling like a rookie all over again. "Good," Eris said, turning her attention back to the house. "Sergeant Chen has briefed you on the generalities, I assume. I will be more specific. What you are witnessing is not an invasion or an attack. It is a localized failure of physical consensus. The rules that govern this space," she gestured to the Graves residence, "have been overwritten with a more complex, less stable system of logic." Her explanation was so academically detached it made the impossible phenomenon sound like a technical glitch, a server that needed rebooting. "So, you're going to what? Shut it down?" Miller asked. Dr. Eris gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "You cannot destroy an idea with force. Attempting a brute force neutralization and explosive charge, for example, would be like trying to delete a computer virus by smashing the monitor. All it would do is scatter the corrupted code across a wider area, with catastrophic results." She swiped a finger across her tablet, bringing up a 3D wireframe model of the house, with a chaotic, pulsating sphere of energy shown originating from the study. "Our goal is not destruction. It is reassertion. The anomaly is a highly complex, chaotic system. The way to collapse a chaotic system is to introduce a simple, powerful, and fundamentally mundane concept that it cannot integrate. We call this a conceptual anchor." Miller looked at Chen, who gave a slow nod, encouraging him to listen. "Imagine a story filled with dragons and magic," Eris continued, her analogy precise. "If you introduce the concept of municipal tax code into that story, the narrative either has to fundamentally change to accommodate it, or the entire structure collapses under the weight of the contradiction. The dragon has to file a 1099G for its hoard. The magic user needs a permit for his fireball. The story breaks." She pointed the tablet toward the house. "That place is currently a story about impossible geometry. We are going to introduce a powerful, undeniable, and boringly simple truth into its narrative. We will find the focal object that is generating the chaotic idea, and then we will present it with a concept so fundamentally mundane, so deeply rooted in consensus reality, that the complex unreality of the anomaly cannot sustain itself in its presence. It will be forced to resolve back to the simpler, more stable rules of physics we all agree upon." The idea was staggering. They weren't fighting a monster, they were performing a kind of ontological exorcism. They were going to weaponize the concept of normalcy. The SOP manual in Miller's locker was a book of rules for a world he thought he knew. Dr. Eris and her team had a rulebook for reality itself. With the theory laid bare, the practical application began. 2 Sigma technicians, carrying handheld sensors that chirped and whirred erratically, entered the Graves residence with Chen. Miller was instructed to remain with Dr. Eris, monitoring the exterior readings. He stood by the chalk-drawn perimeter, feeling like a beat cop assigned to watch the tape at a crime scene he wasn't cleared to enter. Inside, the technicians moved with methodical purpose. They swept the house, their sensors guiding them, the rhythmic chirping growing more frequent and higher in pitch as they neared the study. The residual echo of Arthur Graves continued its silent coffee ritual in the kitchen, a constant, looping reminder of the event as human cost. Eris watched the data stream on her tablet, her expression focused. "The highest concentration of paradoxical energy is in the study, as you identified," she said to Miller, her eyes not leaving the screen. "But the point source, it's not at floor level. It's elevated. approximately 9 feet up, near the north wall. Chen's voice crackled over Eris' comms unit. Eris, Watcher 7. There's an attic access panel in the ceiling of the study. Readings are spiking from that location. Copy, Watcher 7. Proceed with caution. Open it. Miller imagined them inside, standing in that impossibly long room, staring up at a simple square of drywall in the ceiling. One of the technicians brought in a stepladder. A few moments of tense silence followed, then Chen's voice returned, tight and strained. We have visual on the focal object. A few minutes later, the two technicians emerged from the house. One of them was carrying a small, lead-lined containment box with extreme care, as if it were a live bomb. They placed it gently on a portable analysis table they had set up on the lawn. Chen followed them out, his face pale. He must have found it when he was cleaning out the attic, Chen said, his voice low. Brought it down to his desk to look at it. That's when it started. Dr. Eris nodded, her attention now entirely on the box. She manipulated a small robotic arm built into the analysis table, which carefully opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft, gray foam, was the source of all the chaos. It was a sculpture, no bigger than a human fist. It was made of a metal that shifted in the afternoon light, appearing as dull, pitted iron one moment and iridescent, polished chrome the next. But its material was the least strange thing about it. Its shape was a deliberate and profound violation of geometry. It was a knot of angles and planes that twisted in on themselves in ways the human eye could not properly process. Following any single line would lead your gaze on a journey that ended where it began, but somehow on the opposite side of the object. It had too many corners for its number of faces, and some of its surfaces seemed to be both concave and convex at the same time. Looking at it directly for more than a few seconds caused a physical ache behind the eyes, a wave of nausea and cognitive dissonance, as the brain fought and failed to reconcile the visual data with a lifetime of understanding physical space. It was a piece of art that actively dismantled the viewer's perception of reality. Non-euclidean, Eris murmured, peering at the object on a filtered monitor rather than looking at it directly. A three-dimensional object projecting a four-dimensional shadow. Every angle is a paradox. No wonder it destabilized the local reality. Mr. Graves probably stared at this thing for an hour, and it unwrote the room around him. The investigation into Arthur Gravis' personal effects had turned up a receipt from a local estate sale, dated 3 days prior. The item was listed simply as small metal sculpture, miscellaneous. He had paid $5 for it. $5 for an object that had warped a city block and consumed him whole, a piece of impossible art that was now humming quietly in a lead box, patiently waiting to unravel the world. With the focal object identified and isolated, the Sigma team shifted from investigation to neutralization. Dr. Eris directed one of her technicians to the second van. The technician returned wheeling a heavy cart. On it rested a single, matte black cube, about 2 feet on each side. Unlike the lead box holding the sculpture, this container had no visible seams or locks. Its surface was perfectly smooth, cold, and non-reflective. We have identified the problem, Eris announced, her voice resonating with the finality of a surgeon about to make the first incision. The problem is a concept infinite, paradoxical complexity. Therefore, the solution must be its conceptual opposite. She placed her hand on the black cube. A low hum emanated from within, and a nearly invisible line appeared on its top surface, which then split apart, the lid retracting smoothly into the body of the container. Inside, suspended in a soft, glowing magnetic field, was the conceptual anchor. It was a sphere of polished black obsidian, approximately the size of a bowling ball. It was so perfectly round, so flawlessly smooth, that it seemed to drink the light around it, reflecting nothing. It was a hole in the visual world, a void given form. Where the sculpture was a riot of impossible angles and jarring surfaces, the sphere was the embodiment of absolute, singular simplicity. It had no edges, no faces, no beginning and no end. It was the purest shape imaginable. Fourth protocol, Chen said quietly, standing beside Miller. Symmetrical inversion. You fight chaos with order. You fight complexity with simplicity. Miller stared at the perfect black orb, and in its stark, featureless surface, he finally understood what Eris had meant. It was more than just a sphere, it was a physical manifestation of an idea. The idea was unity, simplicity, and predictability. Every point on its surface was equidistant from its center. There were no tricks, no paradoxes. It was a statement of fact, rendered in stone. The sculpture generates a paradoxical field by presenting the environment with a set of unsolvable geometric problems, Eris explained, as if lecturing a university class. The anchor generates a field of pure, logical consistency. It presents only one, simple, verifiable truth. When we introduce the anchor into the epicenter, the two conceptual fields will attempt to occupy the same space. They cannot coexist. A technician, wearing thick, insulated gloves, carefully lifted the obsidian sphere from its magnetic cradle. It seemed impossibly heavy, its density appearing to warp the air around it. He began to carry it toward the house. The chaotic system, being inherently unstable, cannot sustain itself against a constant, stable assertion of normalcy, Eris continued. The paradox will be forced to resolve. The complex idea will collapse in the face of the simple one. The room will be forced to choose one set of rules, and it will choose the most stable, most fundamental ones. It will choose the sphere. The technician walked up the porch steps and into the house, carrying the inky black orb before him like a religious offering. He moved slowly, deliberately, toward the open door of the study, the place where the rules of the world had been most thoroughly broken. The mission was no longer to measure or observe. It was to remind a place that had forgotten what it was supposed to be. They were going to cure a house of its madness by showing it the simple, irrefutable truth of a perfect circle. The technician carrying the obsidian sphere disappeared into the study. On the lawn, everyone waited. The harmonic dampeners continued their subsonic hum, holding the unstable reality at bay. Dr. Eris watched her tablet, her face a stone mask of concentration. Miller felt a tension coiling in the air, a sense of immense pressure building toward a breaking point. Proximity alert, Eris said, her voice sharp. Anchor is within 2 meters of the focal object. Brace for resolution. The word resolution was wholly inadequate. It began not with a sound, but with a feeling. A deep, violent lurch in Miller's inner ear, as if the entire world had dropped 10 feet. Simultaneously, the low hum of the dampeners pitched upward into a piercing shriek of stressed machinery. Then came the sound. It was not an explosion, but a deep, resonant groan that erupted from the very foundations of the grave's residence. It was the sound of stressed timber, twisting metal, and shattering plaster, all compressed into a single, gut-wrenching moment. The house visibly shuddered, its frame contracting as if it were a long exhaling a breath it had held for too long. Dust puffed from the eaves, and a pane of glass in an upstairs window cracked with a sharp retort. From the open doorway, a wave of displaced air blasted outward, carrying with it the scent of ozone and dry, ancient dust. The residual echo of Arthur Graves in the kitchen flickered like a faulty projection, then dissolved into a shower of faint, fading light, his endless loop finally broken. The physical shockwave was immediately followed by a psychic one. A flash of searing, white-hot pain shot through Miller's skull, a migraine compressed into a microsecond. For a brief, agonizing moment, his own memories felt fluid, unstable. He saw the Gable woman's face, her eyes wide with the terror of holding two truths at once. He felt the impossible length of the study stretch out before him. He saw faint, hexagonal patterns overlaid on the world. These were not memories, they were psychic shrapnel, fragments of the collapsing anomaly being violently ejected from the local consciousness. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The groaning of the house ceased. The shriek of the dampeners subsided back into their low hum. The pain in Miller's head vanished, leaving only a dull, throbbing ache. A profound silence fell over Sycamore Lane, a true and natural quiet this time, empty of the charged rawness that had preceded it. He looked at the house. It was just a house. A small, beige, unremarkable suburban home. The sense of dread, the feeling of impossible space, was gone. It had been scrubbed clean. He looked at Chen, who was leaning against the patrol car, his eyes closed, breathing slowly and deliberately. Even the stoic sergeant had felt the snapback. Dr. Eris and her team were already checking their instruments, their movements once again calm and efficient, though Miller noted one of the younger technicians was wiping a trickle of blood from his nose. The technician who had carried in the sphere emerged from the house. He was no longer carrying the obsidian orb. He walked with a slight limp, his face pale, but he gave Dr. Aris a thumbs up. The interior dimensions are now consistent with the exterior floor plan, Aris announced, reading from her tablet. All paradoxical energy signatures have resolved to baseline. The event is concluded. Miller felt a wave of dizziness and leaned against the van for support. His mind felt scoured, tenderized. He was intact, but he knew with an unnerving certainty that some fundamental part of his understanding of the world had been permanently altered. He had not just witnessed the event, a small piece of its impossible logic had passed through him, and its violent removal had left a scar. The cleanup was as efficient and discreet as the arrival. Unit Sigma packed their strange equipment back into the unmarked vans. The lead-lined box containing the sculpture and another, larger crate, presumably holding the obsidian sphere, were loaded and secured. Dr. Aris conducted a final sweep of the area with a handheld sensor, then gave Chen a curt nod. Within 30 minutes of the event's conclusion, they were gone, leaving behind nothing but the faint, intricate chalk patterns on the sidewalk, which were already beginning to fade. The cordon was lifted. The other officers, who had been holding a perimeter against a threat they couldn't comprehend, were dismissed with a brief, unsatisfying explanation about an atmospheric anomaly causing temporary sensor malfunctions. They grumbled, but they left. Sycamore Lane returned to its placid, suburban quiet. Inside the house, there was no sign of Arthur Graves. The study was now a perfectly normal, if slightly dusty, room of entirely logical proportions. The only evidence of the day's events was the faint smell of ozone and a few hairline cracks in the plaster. Back at the station, the air was thick with the mundane reality of paperwork. Chen dropped a stack of incident report forms on the desk in front of Miller. "Your report," he said, his voice back to its usual FTO monotone. Miller stared at the blank pages. How could he possibly begin? Upon entering the residence, this officer observed the spatial distortion of approximately 37 feet. Had been on administrative leave and in a psych evaluation before the ink was dry. "What do I write?" Miller asked, the question feeling absurdly inadequate. "What's the official story for that?" Chen pulled up a chair and sat down opposite him, his expression serious. "There was a gas leak," he began, his voice taking on the quality of a formal dictation. "A slow, odorless leak of an unknown subterranean gas, possibly radon mixed with a naturally occurring psychoactive compound. It had been accumulating in the Graves residence for some time." He paused, letting Miller absorb the framework of the lie. "The initial call was a wellness check for Mr. Arthur Graves. Upon entry, you and I were exposed to a low concentration of the gas, resulting in minor disorientation and perceptual distortion. Recognizing the potential environmental hazard, we withdrew and established a perimeter. The fabrication was elegant in its plausibility. It explained their call for backup, the cordon, the strange behavior of the residents. The increased seismic pressure from a minor, unrecorded earth tremor," Chen continued, "caused a larger release of the gas, which spread to the immediate vicinity. This resulted in a brief period of mass hysteria and shared hallucination among the residents of the block, explaining the flurry of bizarre calls to dispatch. The responding officers, including Deputy Rodriguez, experienced similar confusion upon entering the affected area." He leaned forward. "A specialized hazmat unit from a federal agency, unnamed for security reasons, was called in to handle the situation. They deployed atmospheric neutralizers," he tapped the desk, indicating the harmonic dampeners, and ventilated the area. The groaning of the house was the structure settling after the tremor. The cracks are evidence of that. The psychic snapback we felt was the last of the gas dissipating from our systems, a common neurological reaction to the cessation of exposure. The story was a perfect, hermetically sealed narrative. It accounted for every anomaly, every strange event, and translated it into the bland, bureaucratic language of an industrial accident." "And Arthur Graves?" Miller asked quietly. Chen's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Graves, likely suffering from advanced effects of the long-term exposure, wandered away from his home in a state of profound confusion sometime before our arrival. He is now officially a missing person. An ongoing investigation. We will find no evidence he ever returned. This was the final, brutal piece of the puzzle. The truth that a man had been consumed by a $5 sculpture was too monstrous. So he would be erased, replaced by a tidy, tragic story of an old man lost to dementia and a freak gas leak. "You will write this report, Miller," Chen said, his gaze unwavering. "You will include every detail of this fabricated narrative. You will file it. You will memorize it. And when you are asked, you will repeat it, under oath if necessary, until you believe it yourself. This is the job. This is how we protect the public. Not just from the things that are out there, but from the knowledge of those things." Miller picked up the pen. Writing the report, he understood, was his final exam. It was an act of complicity, a sworn oath to uphold not just the law, but the lie that protected it. He was no longer just a police officer. He was becoming a watcher. Miller's pen scratched out the last sentence of the report, the words feeling foreign and false. He described the final atmospheric readings of the hazmat team and the official classification of Arthur Graves as a missing person, endangered due to a pre-existing medical condition exacerbated by gas exposure. He signed his name at the bottom, the familiar loops of his signature looking like a forgery. The lie was complete, a neat, 3-page fiction that would be entered into the official record, burying the impossible truth under a mountain of plausible procedure. He pushed the papers across the table to Chen, who sat opposite him in the stark, fluorescent quiet of the deserted briefing room. It was late, well past the end of their shift. The station around them was atune, the only sounds the hum of the lights and the distant clatter of a cleaning crew. Chen picked up the report, his eyes scanning the lines of text. He didn't read it for content, he had dictated its core, but for tone, for the commitment of the falsehood. He read it for a full minute, his expression giving nothing away. Finally, he straightened the pages, tapped them into a neat stack on the table, and gave a single, slow nod. Miller had passed. Chen then reached down beside his chair and lifted a simple, black canvas messenger bag. He unzipped it and removed something wrapped in oilcloth. He placed the heavy, rectangular object on the table between them and unwrapped it with a deliberate lack of ceremony. It was a book, thin and unassuming. Its cover was made of a smooth, matte black material that felt like hard rubber and seemed to absorb the light, leaving no reflection. It bore no title, no markings, no insignia of any kind. It was utterly anonymous, a void in the shape of a book. Chen slid it across the polished table. It moved without a whisper, coming to a stop directly in front of Miller. "Memorize it," Chen said, his voice a low command that carried the weight of an oath. "Then destroy your copy. You'll be issued a new one every 6 months. You'll need it." Miller reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before his fingers made contact with the cool, strange cover. The book was heavier than it looked, its density suggesting pages made of something more than paper. He lifted it, the weight a tangible representation of the new responsibility he had just formally accepted. He opened it. The pages were not paper, but a thin, flexible polymer, waterproof and tear-resistant. The text was printed in a clean, sans serif font, stark white against the gray of the pages. There was no author, no publisher, no introduction. It began immediately with a table of contents that read like a madman's index of anxieties. Section 1 Spatial Phenomena. 1.1 Compromised Integrity Architectural Bleed. 1.2 Non-Euclidean Geometries Focal Objects. 1.3 Temporal Stutter and Looping. Section 2 Perceptual and Cognitive Hazards. 2.1 Residual Echoes Human and Animal. 2.2 Sentient Auditory Phenomena Mimic Calls. 2.3 Conceptual Contamination. The list went on for pages. Biomorphic Architecture. Chronological Intrusions. Gravitational Inversions. Each entry was a key to a different kind of lock on reality. He flipped past the index, his fingers stopping on a random page. It was a numbered list of directives, written in the same clipped, precise, and utterly dispassionate language Chen used when the situation turned strange. Protocol 1.1a Initial Response to Architectural Bleed Level 1.3. 1. Distrust all sensory input. Perception is compromised. 2. Establish exterior dimensions using physical, analog measurement tools. See Approved Equipment List, Appendix A. This is your ground truth. 3. Do not use digital recording devices. Analog chemical photography is the only reliable method of documentation. 4. Under no circumstances will you attempt to reconcile interior and exterior measurements. Document the discrepancy and await Unit Sigma deployment. He had lived these rules just hours ago. The unofficial, unwritten protocols were not unwritten at all. They were here, codified, organized, and indexed in this slim black book. He turned another page and saw the protocol for residual echoes, with its final, chilling directive in bold type: any officer attempting interaction will be immediately removed from the scene and placed under a 72-hour psychological quarantine. He thought of Deputy Rodriguez and the abyss she had nearly stepped into. He closed the book, the cover shutting with a soft, solid thud. The departmental SOP manual in his locker was a thick, heavy brick, full of answers for a world of predictable violence and human failing. This book was its shadow, a whisper-thin volume that contained the procedures for a universe that did not care about human laws at all. One book was a shield. This one, he realized, was a weapon. And a warning. It was the unofficial addendum, the testament to a duty far older and stranger than the one he had sworn an oath to. It was his copy now. We began with the idea that the most important reports are the ones filed only in memory, the lies that protect us from the truth. Officer Miller's story is a stark reminder that the barrier between our world and one of impossible angles is terrifyingly thin. That barrier isn't made of concrete or steel, but of procedure, sacrifice, and carefully constructed official narratives. The truth of what happened on Sycamore Lane wasn't defeated, it was simply contained, catalogued in a thin black book that now rests in a new keeper's hands. If you feel the weight of these unwritten histories, thank you for joining us here at the Keeper of the Dark Logs. The decision to protect the public from the truth is the core of this duty, so I want to ask you, was the choice to erase Arthur Graves' true fate and create the ghastly cover story a justifiable act to maintain order, or is there a moral duty to reveal the real dangers, no matter the cost to public peace? Until the next file is unsealed, stay vigilant. We'll soon open a log detailing the acquisition of another focal object, one that wasn't bought at an estate sale, but was found when it caused every clock in a 3-block radius to start running backward.